very strange. So why isn't the air raid siren going off?
I don't know.
Barefoot Gen is a well-known anime title on the internet for its graphic depiction of the events leading up to and during the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima. But what you might not know is the real events that happened to Keiji Nakazawa that are detailed in Barefoot Gen. He goes into detail about what the actual story behind Barefoot Gen is in his autobiography, Hiroshima, which I picked up recently and read, so I decided to make this video that goes over some of the more important details about what actually happened in Nakazawa that is depicted in Barefoot Gen. And I'm not going to go over the whole thing, so I highly suggest that you pick this up if you're interested in it. I think first-hand history accounts are the best way to learn history. To begin with, before the bombs drop, food scarcity is one of the biggest issues that Gen and his family face. He and his little brother actually go so far as stealing a fish from a local pond to feed their pregnant mother. In reality, Nakazawa's mother was pregnant, but unlike in Barefoot Gen, where both of them shudder at the thought of feeding their mother a caterpillar, Nakazawa and his younger brother would actually go daily to a local shooting range, which was just a large open grassy field, and catch as many locusts as they could so that they could feed them to their mother. They would put the grasshoppers and locusts into a bucket, wait for them to cleanse themselves, and then they would fry them and put them on skewers for that night or the next night's dinner. It goes without saying that the war shaped the life of these people at this time in Japan. Nakazawa would later write that there were multiple drills his mother and father would go through. His mother, even being pregnant, had to get up on a ladder at one point and help take full buckets of water to the second floor of a building to simulate putting out a fire after a bombing run. His father would have to show up with bamboo spears and stab them into makeshift British and American soldier dummies. While his father was very skeptical that they would win the fight with bamboo spears against machine guns, the veteran who was running these drills said that if you stab somebody in the chest with a spear, his muscles would contract, making it hard to pull the spear out. He also went on to explain that Americans and British were weak because they sat in chairs all day, whereas the Japanese sat on the floor and had stronger core muscles. Barefoot Gen also has a lot of pro-militant ideology in it, with Gen singing under his breath some of the songs that soldiers would sing as they marched by, and pretending to hold a fishing rod like a rifle as he marches his way to catch a fish for his mother. Overall, both sides kind of show what it was like in Japan at this time. Everybody was for the government, whether they wanted to or not, and believed, even if it wasn't true, that they would win the war. Everyone kind of followed this except for Gen's father, who explained that Japan would soon lose the war and that life would go back to the way it was, much to Gen's amazement. Gen's father is a one-to-one description of Nakazawa's father as far as the autobiography goes. Both are heavily anti-war and heavily anti-Japanese government. So far, in fact, that Nakazawa's father in real life actually got jailed for 14 months for thought crimes against the emperor. He was part of a theater group that would perform anti-war songs as a sign of protest against what was happening, kind of like how Bella Ciao was for the Italians at the time. Sadly, as Nakazawa would write, he believed that one of the theater group was actually a secret thought police because all of the members, including his father, were jailed as well. And when he finally came back, they had to nurse him back to health. Nakazawa remembers the first time they ate, his father went to pick up utensils, only for his hand not to work. His father explained that the 14 months while he was there, he was fed food with no salt. This made his fingers curl up, his muscles atrophy, and his muscles unable to work. His father would eventually recover, and life as he knew it would go back to some semblance of normal. And still, despite his incarceration, his father continued to spread his anti-war sentiment. One such example Nakazawa remembers in his autobiography is talking about his Uncle Y. Uncle Y was in the Navy and would constantly visit the boys in the family and let the boys play with and look at his sword. While sitting with Nakazawa's father, Uncle Y said, "I'm off now to take part in the Pearl Harbor attack. I'll die a splendid death for the country, for the Emperor." Nakazawa's father then glared at Y and said angrily, "Down with the Emperor's system. This war is wrong. Japan will surely lose. Don't die a dog's death." This would be the last time that Nakazawa saw Uncle Y before the bombs dropped, for soon after he set sail, Nakazawa's mother would grieve and say that Y had died in Pearl Harbor. Sadly, Nakazawa's father's outspoken peace and anti-war sentiment also affected the family. Eiko, Nakazawa's sister, would later be stripped naked in front of her teachers and principal of her school after a student reported money being stolen from them. The reason behind her being picked? Solely because her father was a traitor. This is even sadder and more traumatizing when you realize that Eiko was only in 6th grade at the time this happened. August 6th, 1945, 8:15 a.m. A person's fate, life or death, truly is a matter of sheerest chance. Had I entered the gate that day as I always did, I would have been wiped off the face of the earth. Standing in the broad schoolyard with absolutely no cover, I would have been bathed, my entire body, in the rays the atomic bomb radiated, more than 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt iron. Burned pitch black, I would have died. First I met 5 or 6 women. As I got near them, I was amazed. They had countless slivers of glass sticking out of their flesh. The glass splinters had pierced even their eyeballs, so they couldn't open their eyes. They felt their way along like blind people. In scenes of carnage, fire or calamity, in movies or plays, voices cry out, "Ouch, horrible, help!" People suffer and writhe. But those scenes are unreal. When people are thrown suddenly into the carnage of an extreme situation, they utter not a single emotion-laden word, but act silently, on instinct. Gen and Nakazawa would find themselves running on instinct back home. Gen would see the death of his entire family, his father, sister, and brother, all burned to death while escaping with his mother. In real life, Nakazawa was not quick enough to get there in time. His mother, sadly, watched their entire family burn to death. The only saving grace was Eiko's side of the house was silent, implying that maybe she was crushed immediately by the house, saving her from the grueling fate that her father and little brother would face. Later on in the anime, Gen would gain Ryuta Kondo, an orphan boy starving who would smell their food and go on to be his kind of sidekick and replacement for his little brother. While in real life, Nakazawa's oldest brother, Koji, would come back to help take care of him and his mother. Koji and Nakazawa would also return back to their family's house to dig up the remains of their family members at their mother's behest. As Japan surrendered and people began to rebuild their lives, Nakazawa would slowly learn more about his father through people who would come to visit them. One person, a woman who was incarcerated with his father, who went on to tell him about how they would sing together in prison and the guards would turn a blind eye to them. Another, Uncle Y. Uncle Y's submarine, as it would turn out, would get stuck in the mud during the assault on Pearl Harbor. Unable to free themselves until much later, they would eventually float to the surface, only to find out the assault had taken place, and they were too late. God works in mysterious ways. Uncle Y, a gung-ho, militant man ready to die for his country, was ultimately spared in one of the most bloody naval battles of the Pacific. Nakazawa's father, a peaceful man against the war and the Emperor, would die a gruesome death, with his son screaming just feet away from him. Your father was a great man. I hadn't the faintest idea why he was great, but it was from Uncle Y that I first learned of Dad's thinking. In his autobiography, Nakazawa would continue to write about life after the bomb and after the war in Japan. GIs controlling the streets, gangs of orphan children running amok, black rain that would take his hair for most of his adolescent life, dinners of locusts and grasshoppers being replaced with dinners of crawdads, the thickest being found near human bones in the river, and the confusion that surrounded the atomic bomb after its deployment. It was believed that it was a firebomb with germs in it. The germs would make you sick and kill you if you weren't ready. This later turned out to be leukemia, caused by the radiation. There's more to this story and more to Barefoot Gen, but I suggest that you read it for yourself through Hiroshima, the Autobiography of Barefoot Gen, or just go pick up Barefoot Gen itself. Ultimately, by making Barefoot Gen, Nakazawa immortalized his family and made sure that their deaths were not in vain. Instead, immortalizing them as shining beacons of peace and cautionary tales of the horrors of war to future generations.